The Consolations of Philosophy. That's the book we are discussing this week. Written by Alain de Botton, the book is all about the different kinds of consolations that we can find through philosophy. And today we are going to discuss a chapter on Arthur Schopenhauer and the kind of consolations his philosophy provides. And specifically, we are going to focus on consolations for a broken heart. That is, when it comes to struggling in the matters of love. First of all, the author tells us that Schopenhauer is probably the finest philosopher if you're dealing with the grief in matters of love. To be fair, there's not much competition in this because philosophers, they have traditionally not been impressed with the idea of love, and they have left this subject mostly to poets and romantics. Philosophers, most of the time, they speculated that romantic love was something which was not rational, and it was not for them to inquire, investigate, explore it really. But Schopenhauer did it, and he himself was surprised by the indifference that philosophers had shown towards this subject. In his words, he said, "We should be surprised that a matter that generally plays such an important part in the life of a man has been almost entirely disregarded by the philosophers and lies before us as raw and untreated material." As I said, it's mostly because philosophers thought that they were rational beings and they don't need to inquire something as irrational as romantic love. But Schopenhauer insisted on understanding this awkward reality. After all, it was a reality, it is, and it impacts our life. He says that love interrupts at every hour the most serious occupations, and sometimes it perplexes for a while even the greatest of minds. It does not hesitate to interfere with the negotiations of the statesmen and the investigations of the learned. It knows how to slip its love notes and ringlets even into ministerial portfolios and philosophical manuscripts. It sometimes demands the sacrifice of health, sometimes of wealth, position, and happiness. So, quite an important subject it is, and we can't really brush it off. After all, it impacts our lives so powerfully. So, the question is, how did Schopenhauer see romantic love? Well, his idea was very similar to, in a way, as modern science sees it. For him, it was about the continuation of our species. That is, we human beings, we have this inherent drive within us to stay alive and reproduce. And how that manifests? It manifests in a way that unconsciously, that's what we want to do. That's what we feel like doing, staying alive and reproducing. But when it comes to the conscious, on the surface of it, we feel like we are experiencing certain emotions, and because of that, we create a narrative in our heads, let's say, which could be something romantic. We fall in love with a person, we like certain things about them. Not necessarily we are thinking about reproduction at the point. That's not the point. Nobody thinks that way when they fall in love. But it's the unconscious underneath, or the will to life, as Schopenhauer put it, that is playing its part, the dance of the unconscious. And as I said, it is manifesting through conscious in a way which is so much based on the narrative that is being played out in our heads, most of which we are responsible ourselves. We create that narratives based on the things that we hear around us, things that we have seen growing up, and culture, what it tells us. So all those things, they play their part. And then we see a person, we fall in love. But according to Schopenhauer, just like the modern science, modern psychology, it's about the survival of the species. One of the questions, or the rather mysteries of love, is why him or why her? Why that specific person? A lot of theories are around it. Some people think that it's an idea of soulmate. But what Schopenhauer uh, told us, and what again the science tells us, is because we we just cannot fall in love with everyone. That's not how we are designed to function. We fall in love when unconsciously there's a chance of producing healthy offspring. And that's really the idea of will to life. And that will to life drives us towards a particular person or particular people, let's say. And where the chances of producing beautiful and intelligent and right kind of healthy offspring, they lead us to a particular person, and then it manifests itself in the feeling that the sense of butterflies, the emotion of love that we experience when we see a person. And we create a narrative in our heads that this person we like so much, maybe we like particular details about them, but it's always the inherent will to life that's unconsciously driving us towards it. So, what happens then? Schopenhauer tells us this will to life, what it eventually does is pushes us towards people who can, based on their own imperfections, cancel out our imperfections. So, let's say large nose combined with a small nose, it kind of promises a perfect nose. So, it helps us restore physical and psychological balance in the next generation. And that's what we mean when we say opposites attract, because they really do. For example, a lot of times short women fall in love with tall men, uh, skinny guys fall in love with chubby women. It happens all the times. So this is the idea that Schopenhauer describes. He says the neutralization of the two individualities requires that the particular degree of his manliness shall correspond exactly to the particular degree of her womanliness, so that the one-sidedness of each exactly cancels that of the other. So that's what happens. The opposites attract. But we know there's beauty in it, but there's also the dark side. It's something that Schopenhauer tells us. And I'll read out a passage which will give you an idea how that can be a problem, or rather, it is going to be a problem once opposites attract. He says, love casts itself on persons who, apart from the sexual relation, would be hateful, contemptible, and even abhorrent to the lover. But the will of the species is so much more powerful than that of the individual that the lover shuts his eyes to all the qualities repugnant to him. Then he overlooks everything, misjudges everything, and binds himself forever to the object of his passion. He is thus completely infatuated by that delusion which vanishes as soon as the will of the species is satisfied, and leaves behind a detested partner for life. Only from this is it possible to explain why we often see very rational and even eminent men tied to matrimonial fiends, and cannot conceive how they could have made such a choice. A man in love may even clearly recognize and bitterly feel in his bride the intolerable faults of temperament and character which promise him a life of misery, and yet not be frightened away. For ultimately he seeks not his interest, but that of a third person who has yet to come into existence, although he is involved in the delusion that what he seeks is his own interest. So, this is what the unconscious will to life does. It gives us this illusion that this is what we want, but it's the underlying uh, instinct of our species that is tricking us. So, what is good for us individually is usually not the same as what is good for our species. Ideally, if there was no this idea of the benefit of species or reproduction, that idea was not there, then we would have chosen a partner who is very similar to us. But that's not what happens because of this will to reproduce and reproduce in a particular way. We are attracted to the opposite. That's what we genuinely like. That's how we fall in love. And it doesn't, as I said earlier, it's not that we feel that way that we are going to reproduce. We might not make that choice. We might never have kids. But it's just the instinct that we develop based on that, and based on those aspects, we fall in love with a particular person. And that's really, if you think about it, that's really a tragic idea. Because if this is true, and it seems very rational to me, you are guaranteed to fall in love or marry the wrong person. Wrong as in where the person will trigger you, where things will go wrong, where there will be a lot of turbulence. And that's really the point of it. So that the species go on well. So that's really the tragedy of it. That you have to accept this tragedy. That a person you fall in love with, there's going to be a lot of friction. And if when there is no friction, or somebody who is exactly like you gets along well with you, there's every chance that you're not going to be passionately in love with them. What does that teach us, and how does that console us? Well, just to begin with, first of all, understanding and accepting that there are going to be troubles, there are going to be heartbreaks. Then realizing when you go through a period of grief in romantic relationship or love, you have to understand that it's not your fault. You're not unlovable. It's not that your character, your personality, your faces, your looks, they are abhorrent. If things go bad, if the union ultimately collapses or goes through a bad phase, it's because something deeper is at work here. And that not really necessarily means that you have to live with it, you don't have to part ways, you can. But just understand this process, how it works. That it causes, on one side, it gives a lot of pleasure, romantic love that is, and on the other, it causes a lot of pain and troubles. Similarly, if somebody goes through a breakup, or you go through it, or somebody rejects your proposal, you shouldn't be hard on yourself once again. And they will give you different kinds of explanations, but you must understand the unconscious behind it is governed by the will to life. It's not even their fault. They will try to rationalize it. Sometimes you will try to rationalize it, but you will not have a reason. Just accept this kind of fate that it is, that a lot of things are not in our control. If you like somebody and they fall in love with somebody else, once again, it's not your fault. It's not because you were somehow less intelligent, you lacked something in terms of appearances. No. It's just that the will to life, in terms of their genes, in terms of their unconscious, that was working in a different way. So that the idea was where the healthy offspring could be produced. That's how they liked somebody. Not because of your qualities or intelligence, your appearances, your intellect, none of these things. People say that all these things matter, but they are only trying to rationalize it. In reality, people fall in love without ever realizing why they fell in love in the first place. And that's really what he's talking about here. So, what essentially is Schopenhauer is asking us is not to be surprised by our misery. We should not ask for a point to being alive in a couple or a parent. And it's the worldview where essentially he's talking about that we don't have that kind of free will, at least not as much as we think we do. For example, when it comes to pursuing our love affairs, um, or having children, we pretty much have as much choice as moles and ants. That much freedom we have, and which is not really a lot. We are governed by our own instincts, emotions, and deep desires, most of which we do not understand, and most of which we try to rationalize, and so it goes. And more importantly, he reminds us that we have an antidote to it, to our miseries, which is art, literature, poetry. Through these forms, we can look at them and see our misery, see our troubles, and then empathize with ourselves. We can understand that pain, we can understand the characters, and that will really console us. Because that's what really great art does. If you think about great art, it it is very specific in nature. When you read great books, great novels, they point out very specific details of an individual, of a character. But then the beauty of it is the more specific an art gets, the more generalized in a way its message becomes. And that's how, through one person's suffering, the whole humanity can benefit. One person's suffering, as in art. When we see a character's suffering in a form of art, the whole of humanity, so many of us, can learn our lessons. We can feel those emotions. And that really provides a lot of comfort and consolation to us. Just to remind you, these are a couple of things that he mentioned. First, that love affairs, romantic love, is going to be tragic, is going to lead you to misery, is going to cause a lot of distress and trouble. It is supposed to do that. Then what do? You seek the shelter of art, literature, poetry, and we keep growing. We keep finding a way to heal ourselves through art. And that's really the idea, that between these periods of digging in the dark, there has to be some effort to transform our tears into knowledge, into wisdom. And that's what art teaches us to do. So that's the idea here. And that was the chapter about consolations for a broken heart. So that's it for today. And in the next episode, which is going to be the last one on this series, the book that we are discussing, the Consolations of Philosophy, where we will talk about Friedrich Nietzsche. So I hope you'll have a good time there, and I'll catch you then. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you'll tune in tomorrow as well. Thank you.